Hello Tiger fans, Michael Moss, independent Tasmanian tiger searcher researcher on mainland Australia only. I don't believe they're in existence anymore, Tasmanian tigers in Tasmania. They haven't been since the last one died in that pen in 1936. This is the third video in a week, it's been a little busy folks. I recently contacted Parks Victoria to see if they're screening for Tasmanian tiger as part of their environmental DNA screening process, to see if they've added it on. And they haven't, unfortunately. But the good news is it's only taken them a few days to get back to me on this. So anyway, I'll just read it, the letter and the reply, or email. Follow up on my previous request regarding environmental DNA and Parks Victoria and if they are screening for Tasmanian tiger. Official. Big word there. Thank you for your inquiry. We do use Enviro DNA for screening for extant, that's existing threatened species. Enviro DNA, which is a private company in Melbourne that processes and distributes the environmental kits. Environmental DNA kits. Enviro DNA is one of many tools in our monitoring toolkit. However, we do not screen for extinct species such as the Thylacine. Our legislative obligations under the Parks Victoria Act 2018 include protect, conserve and enhance Parks Victoria's managed land, including its natural and cultural values for the benefit of the environment and current and future generations. Under the legislation, our obligation does not extend to detecting species considered long extinct. Unfortunately, our resources are limited and we must prioritise the protection of current threatened and endangered species. Good luck with your endeavours. Kind regards, Jess. Okay, that's nice of them. So you're on your own, Michael, on your Tassie tiger chase. Mind you, Parks Victoria have avoided taking action on this issue for decades. And the bottom line is, scientifically, it is possible these creatures are here because they haven't done enough mammal surveys to rule them out. And I was involved with Enviro DNA a few years ago in helping set up the mechanism for people just to go to a waterway and take a water sample, or even a soil sample, but water samples are a real time measure of whether a creature's in existence, rather than soil, which, you know, because there used to be Tassie tigers here officially 2,500 years ago, but it's very hard, well, I don't think they can at the moment distinguish in soil the age of the DNA, but you know that if it's in water, I won't go into the technical part of it, but you know it's probably within a week or less or whatever. So yes, it's a very interesting response, and yeah, so they have the capability now, but they've just ignored it to screen, and it doesn't cost very much because Melbourne Water, as I said in a couple of other videos, they used it. They added the Tasmanian tiger into their screening list. So when they send the water samples back to Enviro DNA, this private company in Melbourne, to screen for DNA, then they compare it with Tasmanian tiger. It's on the list, but it's not on the list when Parks Victoria or the other organisation, by the way, Arthur Rylah Institute, which is the environment section. This is Parks Victoria is obviously in charge of the parks, national parks in Australia, by the way, are the state responsibility. So they're in state and national parks, it's Parks Victoria. They come under the umbrella of DECA, D-E-E-C-A, which is also the other company comes under them, or state government's company, not companies, they're state government bureaucracy monopoly basically. They come under that umbrella, Arthur Rylah and Parks Victoria. There is a third outfit under that called the Catchment Management Authorities in Victoria. They have used this company, but I strongly doubt they put Tasmanian tiger on their screening list because these other two haven't. and they'd use it a lot less than these organisations anyway. So yeah, all very interesting, and well, they're basically saying it's extinct. So technically they're right. Right, the definition of extinction. So I can't quibble with that, but it's the bottom line is though that it's scientifically possible that these things are here. Just because they haven't found something, unless you've done the mammal surveys, and that's why I got this on the list. Because if these organisations, government monopoly, had been screening like Melbourne Water done, it would rule the Tasmanian tiger out. Because these things can't remain invisible. And a lot of them, as I said before, in the press, etc., a lot of Tasmanian tigers were trapped. If you look at the old trapper records in Tassie, they were trapped around water sources. You know, the trapper's diary would said, you know, this creek and that creek, or this lake or this wetland. So this technology would have sussed it out in country Victoria. So yes, so it's still possible, folks, and they're not using the technology. I think part of the reason is they're protecting their own backsides, because they're going to have a lot of explaining to do. You know, they're not going to be able to hide behind this excuse, especially this one. Unfortunately, our resources are limited. Well, no, they're not actually, because you have massive amounts of money going into the wages of time-serving, job for life, unproductive staff. And I know that because I've spent a couple of years networking across country Victoria. And the fact is you're a monopoly, Parks Victoria, and the money goes to wages, and you've had lots of resources, and it costs stuff all to put an extra Tasmanian tiger onto the species list. So maybe cut out some staff, get private enterprise in. You know, 20 years ago in Australia, the federal and state governments got together 20, 30 years ago. It was a 10-year process where they reformed these state government conservation these state government monopolies across electricity, gas, and a number of others. And they didn't get to conservation. And basically, these other organisations were forced to get private enterprise in, competition, or non-profits in. Opened it right up. Unfortunately, it didn't happen to conservation. And it's not only Victoria, it's the National Parks and Wildlife Services around Australia and the Environment Departments. So it's not only Victoria, but Victoria seems to be stubbornly the worst of them. I mean, New South Wales, the scientist I spoke to there, and that's in a podcast a couple of years ago, he said he'd stick it on the list. They're actually screening for Tasmanian tiger. So well done to New South Wales, well done to Melbourne Water. As you'll see the map up on the other podcast I put up a few days ago, outside of that area it's game on, because Parks Victoria, outside of these areas and inside that area, but it doesn't matter because Melbourne Water basically went twice, as I mentioned through the podcast, went through massive screening program from one end of their catchment to the other using environmental DNA and Enviro DNA. Also in some sections, but they got citizen scientists to go out there and do it and send it in. So it was a really good process. So yeah, but so it's game on outside of that area of Melbourne Water that these things can be there. And by the way, in November 1998, I have no doubt I videoed a Tassie tiger. So yeah, the resources are not limited, that's just a cop-out, and does not extend to detecting species considered long extinct, the legislation. Okay, so considered long extinct, even though they haven't done enough mammal surveys. You would think common sense would prevail, because the New South Wales environmental scientist, the guy running the show up there, said that it's scientifically possible. And he put it on the list, which, well, on another video you'll see last year, I think it was, that Enviro DNA confirmed New South Wales was doing it. Victoria, which would have been Melbourne Water, was doing it. I don't think I don't know what Queensland's up to. If they might be using Enviro DNA, but it said southeastern. Enviro DNA, the company said it was southeastern Australia, so it might have been either Tassie or South Australia. Well, this was southeast Queensland, but I don't know. Yeah, so that's with Tasmanian tiger on the list, I should say. So yeah, so it's all very interesting. Just one other thing on another video I forgot to mention that I put up on the Tasmanian devils and at Melbourne Museum. Basically, a gentleman from Adelaide, South Australia, had to come in just as a matter of interest, and did some genetic tests on three Tasmanian devils that were found in Victoria in the last 100 years, approximately. And he found out, he's trying to determine whether they were, remnant or introduced, and it turned out they were introduced. But it's interesting that Melbourne Museum didn't even bother doing that themselves. It took somebody from Adelaide, South Australia, to come in and basically show leadership. And that says everything about conservation in Victoria. They're very left-wing, and they're basically very public sector union dominated, well, more than the others. They're all pretty well the national parks. It's just a job for life. But there is a fair bit of intellectual snobbery as well. Because what Parks Victoria don't do, and they don't even know, was a freedom of information request I took out with the Environment Department. I took one out with them as well, and they got alleged sightings. They're the ones that the rangers can be bothered writing down. I've had a lot of people told me they've seen a Tassie tiger, told the ranger, and I took out FOI requests and there was no record of their alleged sightings. So it makes you wonder just how prevalent it has been over the decades. But anyway, the FOI request revealed that the National Parks and Wildlife Department in 1975 tried to trap a Tasmanian tiger in South Gippsland at a place called Lower Tarwin on the 10 Mile. I only know that because that information was scribbled down below of another sighting that was made by an aeronautical engineer. Now I'm trying to remember off the top of my head because it was 20 years ago now. A bit over 20 years I took out that FOI request, but I think it was 1988 I think that aeronautical engineer saw it in broad daylight, just working on his driveway down there at Lower Tarwin, which is just around the corner from Wilson's Promontory National Park, which is the southernmost point on mainland Australia. So, and I have an introduction theory that Tasmanian tigers were introduced there, which, by the way, you can have a look at my other videos and podcasts, etc. So there we have it. That's Parks Victoria. So I wanted to know, because I wouldn't have bothered coming up. I'm looking at coming over and having a search. I wouldn't have bothered if they told me, these organisations, Tasmanian tiger was on the list of species they're screening for. Then that's the end of the ball game. It wouldn't be possible for them to elude putting DNA in water. But because they're not doing that, it's still game on. So, here I am. I mean, you can only lead the horse to the water. Here I am, doing these monopolies a favour, to find out once and for all if they're there. And you notice, by the way, they use the word here, considered long extinct. Considered long extinct, which is interesting. There's nowhere here in any of the literature I've got that it's not scientifically possible they can be here. And that's because they haven't done enough mammal surveys. And they're going to have to do a lot better, Parks Victoria and the Institute. They're going to have to do a lot better than come out with nonsense like they can't afford it, when Melbourne Water can, New South Wales Government can, and others can. And it's just a matter of putting a species on a list. So it's really protecting their backsides. And there's going to be a lot of explaining. Mind you, though, I am worried, as I said, that with the massive bushfires that we had a few years back, I'm just worried because I think these things were leaking out from the Great Dividing Range. And that's where the fires hit big time. And that was also got to do with you know, not managing your resource properly, these conservation departments. And but yeah, just back on Melbourne Museum just quickly, my understanding is they're paying taxpayers' dollars, by the way, to this extinction, bringing animals back from extinction like the Tasmanian tiger, etc. The Victorian taxpayers putting money into that. Well, that's what I've heard. And you had the fiasco recently where this organisation, I think they're called Colossal or something, they came out about and they said, oh, we've rescued the dire wolf from extinction. Well, the problem was that their end product was 99% grey wolf, 1% dire wolf, and the 1% genetics they played with or whatever was the appearance of the thing. So it was absolute garbage. So if they've got money to put into that, the state government, well, they've got enough money to actually screen for something like this. Mind you, though, they won't reform the public sector unions because they can't be bothered and they'd rather come out with this. But anyway, the good news is, at least they've been, you know, at least we know where they stand, only because I wrote to both, or emailed both of them. And it's still game on in country Victoria, the areas outside of the Melbourne water catchment anyway. And I'm not sure in New South Wales, but I'm assuming they're screening widely there. And the Tassie tiger's on the list there. Anyway, thank you for your interest.